Welcome to the Book Corner with me, Mish Atagana, a podcast for book lovers and book lovers adjacent. Hi everyone, welcome to the Book Corner. As you can see, we have gone video. I'm really hoping that I can keep up the video, but do let me know what you think. Today's episode is with one of my very best friends, Elijah Lawal, and we're going to talk about a book series that he introduced me to. So once again, welcome to the Book Corner, and I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Cool. Welcome. So, in my second podcast, I said I was going to bring a friend on to talk about a book that we both read. It's happening, but we're not talking about that book. So, welcome everyone. Meet Elijah. Elijah is currently in San Francisco, which means I had to stay up really late, which actually is the story of our friendship, if I'm being honest. I'm always staying up late or at awkward times to talk to Elijah because some people sleep in on a Saturday. I don't know what that is, but here we are. Say hi to the people, Elijah.
Hi, people.
What do you mean?
Yeah,
Why are you forming shy?
I'm not shy.
Don't form
I'm just humble.
You're just humble.
I'm just,
Wow. Wow. Wow.
I'm
Okay.
just humble.
We will discuss that at a later date. We will discuss that
You
one at a
know,
later
the
date.
people, when you're like this tall and handsome, you have to be humble. Like, otherwise, it's just overkill. So,
Wait. So today we're going to be talking about Rivers of London. So this is a ridiculously long series of books with side books. It's strange. I've got I think I got 5 or so. There's like probably some on my shelf somewhere of them, and I've got a couple of it on Kindle that I couldn't find in stores. But I started reading these books because Elijah here was like, "Oh, you have to read these books. They're so great." And I think he told me this in what 2020 or 2019. I can't remember,
probably
but it was
2019.
sometime. Yeah, I think it was 2019. Um, and I kind of bought them, but I never really paid attention to them. And only last year, um, I think I was going somewhere and I needed something to read on the plane because I forgot to charge my iPad. So I grabbed the first book and I started reading it. I thought it was just so funny, mostly because the main character reminded me of Elijah here, which he disputed, but later came to see things my way.
There were,
By the
you didn't lie. So you weren't
There we go.
100% correct. I,
I humbly agree to disagree on that. Yeah, humbly agree to disagree on that. So anyway, so these books written by Ben Aronovich, who is obsessed with West Africa, but also we'll discuss that. They're about this police officer in London who discovers that magic is real and that he could practice magic or learn to practice magic. But the thing I loved about the first book was just that it was just this random guy who was just minding his own business, and some weird ghost starts speaking to him, and he's like, "What the f is going on?" And the next thing you know, he gets involved with this guy called Nightingale, who's like the only living wizard in England or something, and they have like this building that's dedicated to like London magical investigation called the Folly. And like our story just takes off from there. But what really got me going was when the Thames River, the manifestation of the Thames River turned out to be a Nigerian woman. I thought that was hilarious. I was like, okay. So, but when I said that he's obsessed with West Africa, he's obsessed with West Africa. But you read these books first, and you started rereading them when I said I
Mhm,
was reading them. What was that
mhm.
second experience like?
I mean, as you know, I am obsessed with London. I think it's the greatest city in the world,
Yeah,
and I've fought many people who have not agreed
he means
with
me. He
that.
means me.
I fought with Mish until she eventually came to see sense. So I think reading it again was just, especially now that I don't live in London anymore, it just, first of all, it made me miss home, but also it just kind of made me realize or remember how old London is, how much of its history is seeped into the people and the occupations. but also how weirdly, because this is kind of a police procedural, but kind of how, as someone who also studied law as well, and just like how like outdated a lot of the laws are that we still use today. Like some of the acts were before, like I live in America now, and some of the acts were like created before America was even conceived as a country, right? So it just brought a very kind of London sensibility back to me, which I really appreciated. And also, as someone who used to read a lot of fiction, but now kind of mostly reads nonfiction, it was like a nice melding of the two because it, like I said, it was kind of like a draw, which kind of also talks about like how people interact with the police in London. As you mentioned, there was like a
Yeah,
lot of West African stuff,
so
and then
that's
mixed
kind
with
of interesting
magic.
because yeah, no, seriously, because I mean, there's chapters where half of the chapter is just Peter Grant going through what he needs to do to investigate the case, and a
Yes,
lot of it is
exactly.
just like really boring computer search things and note taking and it's very it's not the glamorous kind of police investigation you see say maybe in like American writing or American TV shows, right? Heck, it's not even the
Hmm.
kind of um I suppose, hmm, would I suppose like with a show like Luther is very unlike British police work, at least the way it's described in here,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Maybe the closest thing I
Hmm.
could see to that is like the Thin Blue Line or the Nick maybe had a little bit more of
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
But it was just
Yeah.
like, I'm like, Peter, I don't care. Can you just go do the magic thing already? Like, can we just stop that? I thought
Mm.
that was super, super interesting to me. But just side note though, so yes, Elijah reads nonfiction. I'm like, who wants to be sad in this world, guys? We live in the world. It's quite a sad place. Can we just escape into our beautiful books? But he also wrote a book called The Clapback, which is the only book I will model Instagram for because I posted and modeled that book, you know.
You
So go
looked
buy his
great.
book. I know, right?
Uh,
I mean, I hope I help sales. I help sales. So
I
go buy
think
the book.
most of my sales were because of
Makes sense. That seems legit to me, you know. We don't have data to prove it, but that seems legit to me. You know, that seems legit.
it's
Uh,
anecdotal
but
data.
so thank you. I appreciate that.
Did I catch you off guard
This
by
is
being
why
nice to
we
you?
don't have a podcast together because we're gonna get sidetracked. Back to this book, right? So
Hmm.
you're right. Like a lot of the laws, like some I read it, I'm like, what is going on here? Like, are people like actually? Is this how London law is? Like, you know, law enforcement works? And I mean, I don't know. As you know, I have feelings about London, which is slightly changing, but I still have my deep feelings about, you know, London as one of not the greatest cities in the world. But I do love walking in London. Best transport system, hands down, in my opinion. The bus system is the best,
Oh,
hands down.
absolutely. It's it's so small and condensed, but also quite large and disparate, right? Like London is like geographically not that big, but also there's just like so much difference between a South Londoner like myself and a North Londoner or someone who's from like East London. And
Mm.
also even just seeing where parts of like the Black diaspora like end up living as well is like really interesting. So there's like, if you like magic, this book is for you. If you like London, this book is for you. If you like kind of investigations, police work, this book is for you. If you like just like a melding of the supernatural and the realism.
Stop recommending the book. Let's talk more about what actually happens in this book and also the writing in this book, right? I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
yeah, apparently this book is for you. So one thing I will say though, where I really started getting into some of it, because okay, when I say this book has a lot of the series has a lot of books. It has a lot of books. I haven't read all the side books, but I read
Hmm.
one or two, of
Hmm.
which I was just like, I can't do this. Like, it's just too much. But I read a few. I think the first three books I read either while I was in Joburg or travel. But the last of the books, at least the last three of them that I read while in London. And there is
Mm.
something about reading them in the city, I will say, right? Because it makes the world so much richer and realer. I mean, of course, it's based in the urban world, right? So it's not like a fantasy based in this mythical place where the world building needs a lot of help to kind of make you see it. It's things we recognize. Like they talk about, you know, streets that I walk. They talk about,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which train station is at. They talk about coffee shops and things that are so familiar that, you know, I think they were talking about going to Knightsbridge and one of them, and I was visiting a friend in Knightsbridge, and I was just like, this is, you know, this is so cool because I
Mm-hmm.
can experience, you know, like Peter Grant is walking with me, like he's doing his job as as I'm going around the city. But what I did find
Mm-hmm.
super interesting was there's a lot of driving in this book, which is not something I associate with people in London. Like I'm like, why do they keep driving?
Yeah, that's so true. But also, I think that also ties into the realism of being a police officer. Like, right, like you're just when you first, it's like you're on the beat when you first start. So the first book is mostly him just walking around and running around. And actually, that's how he met the ghost, right? He was on his beat.
Mm.
And then as you kind of progress in the ranks, then you start like driving in the police cars. So, but you're right. It's like so interesting how much time they actually spend in the car. And I like that in the following books, after like the first and second one, they start like going outside of London as well. Not so far that they're just like on a train, but like the areas in like Greater London or just on the outskirts of London. So you're right, there is actually.
I think yeah, Foxglove Summer takes place completely out of London.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that's the one with the fairies, or the
Yes.
fair folk. And so I also that's also something that I quite find interesting. It's very ambiguous about some of the magical creatures. So the rivers we know very well. So it's called
Mm-hmm.
Rivers of London because the rivers play quite a role uh, in this book. So we meet Mama Thames, who is the embodiment of the Thames River, at least one half of it, and then Father Thames is on the other side. But it's very much like old God, new God type thing. And then we've got all these little rivers. I didn't even know London had so many rivers, like Beverly Brook, which is Mama James's child and is the embodiment of the Beverly Brook, and all her
Mm-hmm.
sisters and all these people. And then on the Father Thames side, it's also all of them and all their, you know, kind of rivers that all apparently run around London, in and out of London. So I kind of find that the way, like the rivers are the only ones we're very sure of what they are, but all the other fair folk or
Mm-hmm.
magical creature, we're not 100% certain what kind of creature they are. And Ben Aronovich doesn't explain. I think Fox Love Summer is where we know, okay, there's a whole different world. And it kind of goes, I think that book is the one that plays a lot around like changelings and these kids that get kidnapped by fairies and then replaced with like fairy children. And that was actually quite creepy to me, I'm not gonna lie. Like, that was really creepy. Because I was just like, why are we doing this? This is so weird. But I find that so interesting that he just wouldn't identify what someone was like. Molly, like, what is Molly? I don't know what Molly
Mm-hmm.
is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
And
mean, I I I 100% agree with you. I think we start with these like rivers as our primary like route into the supernatural, other than like ghosts and stuff like that, which I think was like is so genius because it's very specific to London. You're right. Like London has like a ton of rivers. London's a very like shallow city. And so there's like lots of rivers around. Also, it was like the hub for trade as well. So which is why there's like lots of rivers. And London was one of the first like modern cities to have like a decent sewage system. So that's kind of why there's lots of rivers. And he just taps into that in a way that no one else has ever done before. But if I had to take an educated guess, I would say his agent was probably like, hey, we're now starting to sell these books outside of London. And these rivers don't mean anything to someone in like Paris or the United States or Canada. Try and branch out to like the supernatural creatures that other people know about. And I think that's maybe when he started going, okay, let's bring fairies in, let's bring unicorns in, let's bring like changelings and all of this stuff, which is kind of more canon in like the superhero world. But I really
Yeah.
think it was so interesting to like tap into the Rivers ones because it's so niche, it's so uniquely London, and I don't
Yeah.
think anyone's.
I think like when I read the first book, I was like,
Mm.
Londoners and Nigerians will enjoy it, right?
Yes,
Mostly
exactly. Yeah.
because he really does tap into like the Yoruba Orisha like type,
Hmm.
mythos, right? Because I'm just like the mama. I literally I just imagine Mama Tem as like this overly like adorned lady with like her outfit and chains, and she's just like bubbly. And I want to say at one point in one of the books, he describes her of like smelling like jollof rice. I swear to God, he did that. I don't know. I feel like that like at some point, or maybe I imagined it of the way he wrote her, where I was just like,
Hmm.
this lady smells like jollof rice. Like if she just walk in smelling of jollof rice, right? And then there's Peter's
Yeah.
mom, who's also from another West African country, Sierra Leone, and it's like
Hmm.
because the way Sierra Leone pidgin sounds is similar to Nigerian pidgin, but a little different. So it's also the way he's writing this. I'm like, how much research does this man do? Also, is his wife like West Africa? What is going on? What is this obsession? But I was talking to somebody else about this book, and they were like, well, it makes sense that he would choose West Africa. There's so many, like, even from, colonization and slave movements and migration
Hmm.
and modern day like African migration, a lot of West Africans do end up in London anyway. It would be random not to represent that kind of culture and history and impact they had on the city if he didn't kind of do that. So I was just like, but I was like, yo, this man is obsessed. Just
He
obsessed.
really is
Um
obsessed.
no, he's
I
obsessed. He's obsessed.
You're right. The way he describes Mama Thames, like honestly, I when I read it, I think of my mother. Like I just think of my mother sitting there, and I think of all of my aunties and my nieces. He does do a really really good job of capturing it, and you're 100% right. Like it makes sense to like tap into the like West African diaspora, like outside of the United States. I think the UK and probably more specifically London has the biggest concentration of Nigerians in the West. So it would be ridiculous not to include it, but you do see like lots of writers who don't want to touch that topic because there is like there's an ongoing conversation about can you write for other cultures and
Mm,
can you adequately represent their culture and their way of being. So I'm actually curious to hear what you think because I think if you're going to do it, you have to do it well because there's a very thin line, as there is in most things in life, right? There's a very thin
mm,
line in like finding people of one culture attractive and fetishizing them, right? And I think there's also a very
yeah.
thin line in like writing about a culture but also stereotyping them. So I'm curious like to
No,
hear what you
absolutely.
think.
So my thing though is there was a part of me when reading it, it felt a little problematic. And it was just some of the ways which he kind of not he didn't overtly like say sexualize, some of these characters, right?
Hmm.
But I think there was a line, and I want to say it's in the first book, it might be in another one where he kind of describes Peter having kind of been transfixed,
Hmm.
by Mama Thames. And I think it's something like he wanted to like put his head in between her breasts or something. I can't remember exactly how the line goes. And I was just
Hmm.
like, that is unnecessary. That woman probably is like looks like his mother or something. Like, why are we doing that? Right.
Hmm.
So for
Hmm.
me, like things that I just felt a little bit random to me. Um and but there are parts where I also do feel he does capture kind of that overprotective nature of a West African mother.
Hmm.
And so there's a spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't read the series, but in the last book, what is the name of the last? There's so many books, but it'll come to me. So in the very last book that I read, which is where Beverly has her baby,
Hmm.
and Peter's mom is comes and she's kind of dressed in this outfit, and Mama Thames kind of pretty much rises from the water to join them, and she's also dressed in this outfit. But and there's this whole thing where both mothers literally are holding on to Beverly as she's about to give birth, and Peter is just like there for the ride, like what do I need to do? But there's just a sense of community and protectiveness and love and all of that, including you know Beverly's sisters as well. So that for me captures the kind of it takes a village that Africans, and especially with Africans, are very strong on when it comes to children, right? And raising children and taking care of children. So there are things like that where I do feel he does his best to capture, but there are parts where I was like, that is so awkward. Please stop. Let's stop this right now, you know. But there's also other parts of it where it's not just say the West African part of it that feels awkward, where Leslie May, for instance, right? So Leslie May is Peter's one-time partner from a work point of view, to one-time crush to now enemy slash whatever it is that they end up being, right? And I just like, I'm like, can we just stop it now? Like the way he describes his kind of crush or attraction to Leslie, and I'm just like, that's a bit awkward. Like, not every man that's literally next to a female is not automatically trying to have sex. Maybe they are. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know. But it just felt a little bit. It felt a little bit like was it felt a bit garish. Like I'm like, come on, like they just finished they just experienced this awful thing. So I think it was when the baby was thrown out the window or something, and they were covered in blood, and they kind of showered, and I think Leslie didn't want to be alone because it was quite a scary thing that happened, and they're lying there, and Peter's thinking about the fact that she's naked next to him or something ridiculous like that. I'm like, come on, that's not what Peter should be thinking about right now. Like, why is Peter thinking about this? Wow.
It's very, I think if one is being objective, I would say no matter the circumstances, it's quite hard to not have that pop into your mind if someone you're attracted
Hmm.
to is naked next to you. I think it's going to be
Interesting.
quite hard to not think about that. And
I'm thinking
come
about
on,
the
you know,
trauma they just went through.
oh, absolutely. But also, I mean, you know as well as I do, like sometimes things like just pop into your head, and that might not mean like you want to do that thing, but it's like a very like, oh, like I'm very aware of this person that I've been attracted to, like
Fair.
right next to me, like naked. Also, by and large, I don't think men write like sexual scenes and like attraction. I don't think they write it well, and I think the
Mm,
reason is because I don't think men's thoughts around sex and attraction is very linear. I think it's just kind of like it's like being 14 again, where you're just angry and horny and hyperactive all the time. And I think sometimes when men write sex, not like every like male author, but sometimes when men write about sex and attraction, they forget that they're not only writing towards like they're not only writing this for men. Like sometimes I could
mm,
read a book where a man's describing sex and I'm just like, objectively, I know what you're trying to convey,
yeah.
but this is you can write this you can write this better.
You can do better.
So you can do better, yes. So for like that there's been some times where I've like had a thought and then I just have to shake my head and be like, where did that come from? Like, no, that's not appropriate. That's not appropriate. This is not the time nor the place. Um,
And when I
and I
said
think
Peter Grant reminds me of you, there you were trying to fight me. There you were trying to fight me.
there are lots of
Mm,
similarities there. And it's
mm,
just like, oh no, this is not time to play. But also I think another thing that kind of captures that moment, and again, spoilery territory, is
mm.
when she did try to make a move on him, he did kind of like, like push back a little bit and then
Fair.
didn't do anything because he was like, oh, I don't think this is like quite the moment. So it might have occurred to him in his thoughts, and like Ben was trying to do, I assume, a good job of conveying how confused Peter might have been in that moment. but also there are
Absolutely.
better ways to write.
I will say though, and as much as I felt it at some point, I was like, Ben, we need to stop writing this book. I think another one is coming out, right?
Oh
I was
yeah.
like, we need to stop writing this book. But what I did feel though, not once did I stop rooting for Peter.
Mm,
In the course of what seemed like an eternity of books, like 100 books, I didn't stop rooting for Peter. And every time he did something silly, I'd be like, oh, Peter, you poor kid.
yeah.
Like, how do we, let's go fix it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that is one thing I will say, that he did a good job of writing Peter in such a way that was, and Peter's very human, right? It wasn't like he was written in this, like I learned this on TikTok where apparently they call them book boyfriends, which are like these perfect guys and whatnot.
Yes.
Peter is
Yeah.
not the ideal book boyfriend. He is not.
Mm-hmm.
But he
Mm-hmm.
is a reflection. He's a mirror of humanity, of who we are, right? Like, we're gonna F up, standard.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Peter does that many times. There are choices Peter makes. I'm like, Peter, we know that this is not gonna go your way. Why do you insist on doing this
Mm-hmm.
by yourself? Call Nightingale, call the
Mm-hmm.
professionals. And especially when Leslie was involved, right? Peter just couldn't make in my opinion, the right decisions. And
Mm-hmm.
but that also made it more endearing, because when I think about it, if my best friend slash ex-work partner was now on the run and it was my job to try and bring them in, I don't know if I would be that willing. And as much as, and Peter's one of those people that he's like all about the law, because we see him a lot clash with Nightingale, and like we have to do things by the book, and
Mm-hmm.
things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So
Yeah.
I felt like, where Leslie was concerned, we could actually see that human aspect where we have faults, and it's a hard thing for me to decide how to act against my former friend, who I think can be redeemed, even though everything says they shouldn't be or they can't, right? I really,
Mm-hmm.
really, I really like that. Um, I also like that. So I wish we could have learned a little bit more about some of the side characters who I just thought were just fascinating. Like Molly and Molly's sister, who I've forgotten the name of, but the one that does the art, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to learn a little bit more. Like, who are these people? How did they get treated? They had been traded by their queen to the human world or something like that. And I wish we could have just understood a little bit more about their past, considering that they don't actually speak.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so even their language is so different. I wish we could have understood a bit more about that. I also like that like, so in Whispers Underground, we get introduced to like the silent people who
Mm-hmm.
whisper, because they don't like loud noise, they don't like a lot of light. I like that does get developed a little bit more. We see some of those characters being integrated into society a little bit more. So
Mm.
if he does write another book, can we just get a book that just focuses on Molly and Molly's story? Maybe it is one of the many side books that I just haven't read. I don't know.
It it might be because I haven't read them as well. You're right. There is a lot of content, and you can tell like he's built this whole world in his head, and this is why I
Mm,
think like his agent was like, that might be a side story kind of thing. Like, let's keep the main
mm.
story like this.
Like
But
Abigail.
I
Abigail gets to have a whole book.
she has a whole book which is like
Yeah,
interesting, but also again tapping into that West African culture is like, oh, she's my cousin. It's like, oh, really? She's a cousin? It's like, I guess, like,
I
she's
guess.
been in my
Exactly. We
house
don't
ever
know.
since I was a
Exactly.
kid.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Is Abigail really his cousin? Like, I think I was like in book 6 or 7, and I was just like, wait, how is Abigail related to Peter again? And it's just like he lives next door. She's your cousin.
Hmm.
That's what happened, and
Yeah,
they're black sheep.
exactly. Is
So that's how it's gonna go
exactly
down.
that's
Like, okay, that's
so.
how it's gonna go down.
And to me, that makes complete sense. So you're right. Like Peter, I mean, obviously I'm biased because you said like we're very similar, and I do see a lot of myself in Peter. But I also think like Leslie, don't smirk. You were right. I can admit it.
God, I
Um,
serve a living God. Thank you.
but I also think like Leslie, I would love to know more about Leslie, but I think
Mm,
she's written quite well as well in terms of like she also loves Peter in a way that even though she's with the faceless man, she always tries to protect him. She's always like, Peter, why are you doing this? Like,
Leslie,
she's
Leslie's me. Leslie's just me going, Peter, really?
Exactly,
again.
exactly. And I really, there's sometimes when some characters break bad, you're just like, you put them as such a moral character. This feels like a weird like 180 for them to do. Whereas with Leslie, I really understood like why she went with the faceless man. I really,
Mm,
really like understood. That was so clear to me. The parameters that she put around like not hurting Peter, like that all made sense to me, and it made her, without going into major spoilers, it makes her decision about the faceless man later in life so like apparent and clear to me. So I really appreciate that kind of writing. I really appreciate like how he wrote Nightingale in a way that he's like the last of his kind, and then he meets this one person, and this one person is eager to create more wizards, and this like Nightingale's been like, yes, but we have to be cautious. I've seen so many of my friends die, and it's just
mm.
such a, I think he just captures the characters like,
So interesting. When I read Nightingale, I have like this weird image in my head, right? He's like a weird combination of like um the the guy from what's his name? He played one of the doctors, but he was also in, was he in the Nick as well? But there's this
one
guy,
of
so
the
it's a
newer
combination of,
ones or the older ones,
no,
newer
so he's
doctors.
the doctor that came after Matt Smith, the older
Oh,
guy.
um,
Was he in the Nick
Peter,
or the thick of it? I can't remember. He was in
the thick
also
of
like
it,
another. He was in
the
the thick
thick
of
of
it,
it,
right?
Peter
So
Capaldi,
Capaldi, Peter
Capaldi.
Capaldi, Peter
Mm.
Capaldi. So it's like a combination of Peter Capaldi meets like Benedict cucumber sandwich. Yes, I said those words. Uh, and like a weird Hugh Grant in there. Like it's like this weird combination of British actors to me. But because
Hmm.
there's something just about the way I can feel his movements even when I'm reading the books. Like
Yeah.
there's a certain way he carries himself. Like this world is so like he's so out of the world that he lives
Hmm.
in.
Hmm.
Because, like he gets introduced to cell phones for the first time, and it's
Yeah.
like fascinating. This is such interesting stuff. I'm like, dude, well, how do you communicate? Pigeons? You know,
Yes.
so it's something that I just thought was super interesting to look at a character where we actually see this character change because of Peter's influence,
Hmm.
and also see Peter change because of his influence. And I really love that. He is a really good writer, Beteronovich. He's a really good writer. He needs to get another subject matter so we can not be beholden to these books. But what I want to talk about is The Faceless Man.
Hmm.
Now, I felt that by the time we eventually got to one, reveal who the faceless man was, and
Hmm.
then eventually, like, fight the big battle with the faceless man, I'm like, oh my goodness, we're still discussing the faceless man.
Hmm.
And I think like it was Broken Homes and Fox Love Summer where we just kind of saw this real pivotal, like, focus towards understanding the pursuit for the faceless man as this overarching theme in the story. But it does make sense if the police work is so tedious that it's not a case of it's not an American TV show where we will solve the crime by the end of
Yeah.
40 minutes, right?
Yeah.
It's like we were solving this over 2.5 years. And these books
Hmm.
weren't even like, because he was releasing the book, but the time that passed between the books weren't like years. It was sometimes months that had
Hmm.
passed
Hmm.
between the books, right?
Yeah.
So I was just like, is there no other villains to deal with other than the faceless man? And that to me was
Hmm.
very fascinating. What do you think?
Yes. I agree. And honestly, I think the reason why, or at least to me, the reason why the series feels longer than it is I feel like they should have like caught and dealt with the Faceless Man by the third book.
Yep, same.
Um, None of the other villains were like as compelling, and it was very frustrating to, even when you had a book about other villains, they would still bring.
But at some point, faceless man was involved in it.
Exactly, exactly. So I do think that for me was a little bit of a miss. I think like 3 books for that could have been like really good. Although one thing I do think that was helpful, which I think mitigates the fact that it ran on for a bit was that there had been different faceless men over the course of the
Yes, that was
centuries.
also very interesting.
I thought that was quite nice. But yeah, the faceless man, it worked for me as a villain. I liked his ending. I'm not entirely sure what he was trying to achieve at the end. That felt a bit
I'm so confused. Like
yeah.
the hanging tree, I
Hmm.
was just like, okay, so what exactly are we trying to do? So like Mr. Punch, like I was so confused by and
Yeah.
also the Mr. Punch relation just didn't make any sense to me.
I like worlds that are, I think there is a tendency for like fantasy writers in particular to make worlds bigger. And sometimes that kind of makes sense, but sometimes you get lost a little bit. And I think the reader does as well. Like this is the same thing with like George R. R. Martin. Like this world has gotten exponentially bigger, so it's harder for him to write because there's like a bajillion characters. And then I think sometimes the tendency is like, let's make this world bigger. I think if they had actually kept it contained, like I don't mind Punch as an antagonist, as a malevolent spirit for the first book.
Hmm.
To make him like the malevolent spirit of London and a demi, like a minor
Yeah.
god, like all I did
What
not
did
need
they end
all
up
of
calling him?
that.
Is like the spirit of mischief or something or whatever
Yeah,
anger in
yeah,
London.
yeah.
So that was strange, and I also kind of felt that. So when we kind of get this big reveal about who Punch is, right? Then it goes back
Mm-hmm,
to like the Roman
mm-hmm,
occupation of London,
mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
then where so he does this in a few books where we kind of have a thing where two times kind of almost sit a little parallel to each other. So Peter
Mm-hmm,
falls through time, if you will,
mm-hmm.
where he gets to experience what was before.
Yes.
So things like where he meets the original Beverly Brooke, but the
Mm-hmm,
original Beverly Brooke still treats him like his Beverly Brooke,
mm-hmm,
right? And
mm-hmm.
and then because that's why we kind of have this battle with Punch, or and then we discover Punch's daughter as one of the rivers. I'm just like, come on, I'm tired.
Yeah,
I couldn't
yeah,
keep up.
yeah.
It
That.
did feel like a George R. R. Martin, scenario there because I was actually explaining to someone earlier today about why a lot of older people read YA fantasy simply
Mm-hmm,
because they don't have that many characters. So YA
mm-hmm.
fantasy, at the most, you're dealing with 6, 7 characters, if there's a lot of characters. And the
Yeah.
worlds tend to stay fairly contained.
Mm-hmm.
So if you read any YA fantasy, the worlds generally stay contained and the group dynamics are well matched, as opposed to
Yeah.
adult fantasies where sometimes there's like 16 characters and you're trying to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I will never forget reading Lord of the Rings, and there's like a chapter in Lord of the Rings. I always forget the name of this guy who just goes on this walk, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we're still walking. We're walking with this man still. Why are we walking with this man still? Same with George R. R. Martin. You're like, wait, who is? You're sitting there going, who is this? How did
Yeah.
they fit into the story? I read Game of Thrones with notes so I could remember what happened in the previous book, right? So you're right.
Yeah.
I think at some point by book 7, 8, Rivers of London just got that way where I'm just like, there are too many. I can't keep up with how many little rivers we're bringing into the story, how many
Mm-hmm.
side characters, like the kind of Fey market and all the people involved, and who owes who a favor. How does Peter
Mm-hmm.
fit? It became too much that I wasn't
Yeah.
quite sure how to follow the story at one point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you ever read, I think we've talked about this, the book, the trilogy Aragon?
Yes, I
I thought that trilogy was tight. It was nice and tight because there was the
did.
tendency to go further, and maybe he has with those five other books, but like the first book is like unassuming person gets a dragon, gets magical powers. Like we all know that story. The second one is like, okay, let's open that world up a little bit. Like he meets the elves and da da da. And then the third book is like, oh, okay, like the battle for against the big bad.
Mm.
Like that is a tried and tested, very tight, it's like the Lord of the Rings movies as well, right? You've got your quest that you're set on, You face the challenges in the middle, you fight the big bad in Return of the King.
I mean, I don't know. Tolkien does have a tendency to also go a little bit
That
crazy,
is
but
true.
sure.
That is true. So as much as I really enjoy this book, I wonder if it would have benefited from just being a tight trilogy.
It didn't.
Um, maybe, yeah,
Well, look, to be
maybe. But
fair,
also
Aragon was
like,
written by like what? How old was Christopher Poloni when he wrote those books? Like
oh, very
14,
young. It was
15?
like,
It was
yeah,
written by a
exactly.
kid, so he's not thinking about 20 different characters. He's like, where's my hero? What do I want him to do? You know?
Yes. Also, like at the time where these Rivers of London books came out, like books were selling more than they are now.
I cut into TikTok.
Oh, one thing we didn't even discuss, which will probably make this like super long, is just like I like that the science was based in magic. It wasn't just like, oh, you have
Yes,
magical powers. Like he literally had to train, he had to study, and it was based on like Newtonian science. I really like that
that's
aspect
so
of the
true.
book as
So
well.
yeah, you know what? You're right. You know, we're gonna have to just make this longer. If you're watching this, I apologize, but we got to talk about that, right? We got to talk about that. So I like that Isaac Newton is also the founding father of magic in
Yeah.
this story. It's like the man on the one with one side of the coin, he was the founding father of science. With another side of the coin, he was the founding father of magic, right? And the folly, like he built the folly. So I
Mm-hmm,
do like that he had to train, but I also like that magic causes chaos with technology where if
mm-hmm.
you have a
Yeah.
phone, anything with like a superconductor or a microchip in it, if you perform magic around it, magic just destroys it. Of
Yeah.
which Peter spent so much time researching to understand why that happens, only to find out that well, it's actually magic is taking power from it to make the
So,
magic. Which I
mm-hmm.
was just so that for me was super interesting. Like, is
Yeah.
science and technology and magic are they really different?
Mm-hmm.
So I quite like that. You're right. I quite like that.
And also doing magic is detrimental to you. It like causes brain
To your body, yeah.
damage.
Like it causes you
Yeah.
brain damage, man.
So yeah, I really I enjoy this series. I'm looking think I think the way to go would be making Leslie
Isn't Leslie already the big bad though? I feel in
she
Amongst Our Weapons, that's the last book that I read. So I feel like
hmm
it feels like Leslie's already the big bad there. It makes sense. It makes sense to make
yeah,
Leslie the big bad.
yeah,
Yeah, it
it
makes sense
does.
to make Leslie the big bad.
But
But I
we'll
want to
see how
see
it goes. I
more.
enjoyed it.
I don't understand how his children are actually. Wait, did he have? Was it one child or two children? I think he gave birth to twins. I can't remember.
Twins, yes.
Like it was twins. Like yeah, Beverly
Hmm.
gave birth to twins. I'm also quite curious as how how does a child of half of a river and a you know mortal and a magician play out? Because Beverly's sister, the Tyburn, married to like a regular mortal man. See any kind of manifestation? Not that I remember with her kids, right? So it'd be interesting to
Yes.
see.
Yeah, no,
Mm.
absolutely. Yeah, because I think, yeah, Tyburns kids, they saw him and they were like, Mom, there's a magician at the door. So like they can like
Yeah, so they could recognize
see
magic.
magic. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it would be quite interesting to see where that goes. And the fact that like Nightingale's retiring as well. Oh, and the
Mm.
one thing that they keep dropping hints at that I really hope has a good like finale is like they always call him like the Starling, the
Yeah,
bringer
the
of the new
Stalin. Yes.
dawn. The- It's like, is he going to reignite magic for everyone? Because ever since he started doing magic, more people have been able to do magic.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're always like the people in the like the market, and whenever he meets anyone from a magical world, they're always like, "Oh, the Daybringer" or something like that. Like, I'm like,
So
who
to
is
be
this man
fair,
to them?
are they calling him the Stalin because of Nightingales, like just kind of bird?
I
But also
think
Stalins are
so.
like hella chaotic as birds.
Yeah, it's weird. There was one, I can't remember what he was called. It was like, it was, like in Game of Thrones, like the prince who was promised. They keep
Mm.
referring to him as something like that. I can't remember what it is. It's something about Star of the Morning or something like that. And I'm just like, is he like the Messiah in this book? So
Well, I
I'll
mean, if
be
they call
interesting
him the
to.
Morning Star, I don't know if that's a good thing. Actually, like out of time because we've been going on forever. But okay, last thoughts on these books.
Mhm.
Um, Overall, as a series, how did it make you feel when you read these books overall as a series?
I felt really good about it. Connected me back to London in a weird way, written by a white man, connected me to like Nigerian culture as well, like the food, even just things like supermall. It
The
was like, oh, they brought like
food.
jollof rice and supermall, and I was just like, first of all, who told?
The person who is Ben Aronovic's West African consultant, we thank you for some
Yeah,
accuracy.
yes, that was very good accuracy. A friend of mine is half Sierra Leonean. The Creole was on point as well, and also as someone who speaks and understands Pidgin, like I got it. There were some things I was like, oh, we wouldn't say it that way in Nigeria, but
But that's what I
like I
mean,
got it.
right?
hmm Yeah,
Mm.
and so yeah, I do like all of the books. The only book I didn't like was the one where he worked at a tech company.
False
Um,
values.
yeah. What about you? How?
Hmm. So I genuinely enjoyed reading the first three books. I mean, to be fair, I do love the series. I think that I was a little bit ignorant because I was a little bit tired. I think it was like book four, book five. I was like, I'm so tired. But when I was in London and I was reading, like I said, there's something about reading a book in a place that is set that
Mhm,
just makes you feel part of the story, right? Um, so I think that reading in London really ignited my love for it. I love uh, Beverly Burke. I just think I love the way she talks. I love the fact that she kind of began with this whole thing where she was forced to kind of babysit Peter for a little bit, and then Peter made the weird bargain where she had to go do like an exchange program on the other side of the Thames.
mhm,
Um, and I love the way their relationship also developed, right? Where so the romance also in this is not like your classic fantasy romance where it's just like this hot
mhm.
and heavy and chaotic and very problematic for the most part. It was it was a good relationship. It was a healthy relationship, and you don't see a lot of healthy relationships in science fiction and fantasy. I'm not gonna lie. So I really like
Yeah,
that.
and I think it was Foxglove Summer where he kind of had to let go of his anger and hurt
Mm,
and fear of what happened with Leslie before he could move on with Beverly, which I thought was like very, very good. Not like
mm,
because I think in the hands of a lesser writer, he would have used Beverly to get over Leslie, whereas I think
mm,
in the hands of like Ben, he his relationship, his like friendship or partnership with Beverly helped him move on from Leslie
mm.
before they started a relationship, which I thought was nice. And I like that she
Absolutely.
rescued him and not the other way, because
Absolutely.
again,
She
in the
fully
hands of a
rescued him.
lesser
But
writer.
she also kind of asks about Leslie and was like, okay, have you checked in? Like, did you talk to your friend? Like, she's very much like, she's not threatened by the Leslie thing, right? She's
Yeah,
very, but I also, to be fair, she's a freaking goddess. So
exactly.
a goddess is not out here getting threatened by, some random magician. But okay, yeah, I definitely enjoyed the series. Love the world building, love the characters. And I also felt the characters grew for sure. There was no character I felt didn't grow. So that was really
hmm
good. Cool. Well, I feel like we've gone. Usually, my podcasts are only like 30 minutes, Elijah. We're like minute 50 here. We
Well,
like this
maybe it's
book,
just that we
contrary to
like each other.
that too. I mean, we did always say we're gonna try and start a podcast together. So maybe this is
It's
us
true.
now finally having this conversation is helping some of that. But thank you so much. I know it's like,
My pleasure.
early for you at 12 p.m., to be waking up so early to join my podcast. I appreciate you. I appreciate you.
Things I do
Uh
for you.
I
Um,
know the things you do for me. It's
should
very
I
nice.
email you the invoice or should like how do we do the
We're
money
gonna end the
situation?
recording now. Thanks, Eliza, for joining us. This is so real. Yeah. Okay. No, we're not doing that. Thank you so much for joining us on the Book Corner, and I hope that you will come back again for next week's adventure. But in the meantime, chat to us on Instagram, GlobeMish on Instagram, and Mish Atagana on TikTok. And if you're on X, if you're still on X, Mish Atagana on X as well. See you next week.